Welcome back to the In Chamber. I'm your host, Tom Schumann. Today, we're pleased to bring you the first in our series of conversations with the Indiana Chamber's 31st Annual Award winners. During an interview in August with this winner for our Biz Voice magazine profile, which is also available today, he told me, by the time this article is published, and by the time this awards event takes place, we'll have an antibody therapy for COVID-19 ready to go. Now, my knowledge of the drug development cycle is pretty limited, but we'd also talked in that interview, and the typical time frame is a span of years, not months. Large global companies, the pharmaceutical industry, not necessarily known for speed, but this organization has moved oh so quickly and safely throughout 2020. Dave Ricks, Chairman and CEO of Eli Lilly and Company, and the 2020 Ogletree Deakins Business Leader of the Year. Welcome to the In Chamber.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be with you.
Well, we appreciate the time. We are talking here in late October. There was certainly plenty of news, pretty much changing on a daily basis, but and we know things will continue to change. But can you give the listeners a sense of where we are today, the company, in regard to the development of these antibody therapies?
Sure. Well, progress continues. I guess since we've last spoken, a number of things have happened. First, we've read out some clinical trials, some that have been quite encouraging, in particular in the setting where someone with high risk factors is newly diagnosed with COVID-19, and then they're treated. What we demonstrated there was depending on the single therapy or combination, between 70 and 85% reduction in the probability you're going to go to the hospital. And we know once you're in the hospital, it's a difficult course for this disease. We also actually stopped a study looking at patients already in the hospital. The thinking here is it's too late in the disease path for this kind of medicine to work. And then we've also been actively working to recruit and enroll a very large study in nursing homes that seeks to actually prevent the first infection when people may have been exposed to the disease. And just today, as we're speaking now, recognize this will air later, we signed a deal with the federal government to supply 300,000 doses of our antibody therapy for use this fall.
Well, that's excellent. We encourage everyone, as we said, to stay up to date. More news, more changes coming. I'm sure that'll continue as we move forward. Let's go back a little bit, though, as I mentioned in the introduction, from when this started early this year to early October to seeking emergency use for an experimental therapy. How were you and your partners and all those involved able to move so quickly?
Well, I'm not sure I have an elegant answer to that. Of course, anything like this takes a huge amount of effort from individuals. And so I first have to just thank the people in our company who live in our community, friends and neighbors, and many of the viewers here who've put in, literally countless hours. We have hundreds of people who've worked nearly every weekend since early March and continue to do so. So huge personal sacrifices to move things quickly. We did a number of things at risk. That's another category of way to speed up. Normally in our business, which is, the risk of failure is very high. Most things don't work. So what we tend to do to spare resources and not subject patients to studies they don't need to be in or manufacture things we have to throw away, what we tend to do is stagger our work. So we do a first step, and then we do a second step, and then we do a third step, learning from one step to the next. Here, we just sort of we launched all boats simultaneously. We started manufacturing almost as soon as we began putting this into humans for testing. We had no idea what setting it would work in, how much we would need, or what the dose was. But we started manufacturing anyway, because if we had waited till the proof came out, which is right about now, it would take another 4 or 5 months to make enough to supply. So we put that in parallel. We also did a number of studies in parallel. Normally, we like to set the dose so we know what dose to give before we try to prove that dose is safe and effective. Here we did dose studies, but simultaneously launched safety and effectiveness studies at every dose, just to try everything we could as fast as we could. And then the same on setting. Normally, you start with risky people and move your way to less risky. Here, we started prevention, treatment, and hospitalized treatment all at once. That's highly unusual for us. Finally, collaboration has been key with the government. So the Operation Warp Speed and the FDA, other agencies have really changed a lot of the way they work, which is typically kind of bureaucratic and methodical, to be much more real time. We have Zoom calls like this with these groups and make decisions in real time, which has been helpful.
I was just going to add, Dave, you had mentioned in our earlier conversation, the manufacturing side, you started it, I believe, in June in the facility in New Jersey. And as you point out, just that time period, being able to manufacture all of that, if you'd waited till November, look at the situation, it would be much worse.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's go back to March then, away kind of specifically from the therapies, but most people in Indiana were starting to get a hint of something taking place here with the virus, but not really sure. You closed your office operations in Indianapolis starting March 9th and had people working remotely. Give the listeners a sense, what was the reaction at that time?
Inside the company, Tom, or outside?
I'd say outside. I know you'd share.
Yeah, I guess inside the company, I think there wasn't a lot of surprise. We, as a global company, we had in this case, because the virus started in Asia, moved to Europe, and then to the US last, had more visibility and there was more discussion amongst employees. And we're in the medicine business, so we pay attention to these things quite a bit. That decision we actually made and communicated to a lot of other people on the 6th or 7th, that on Monday, the following Monday, we'd be pulling everyone out and shutting down everything but our essential operations. Government leaders, business leaders, I think most people were surprised at the time. Seemed like a dramatic step. At the time, I think we had 2 diagnosed cases in the state. So obviously it wasn't a raging epidemic or pandemic at that point. But New York was starting to heat up in a significant way. And I think we knew from our experience that our ability to ascertain how many people had the virus was really impaired by the testing environment we had, and that the risk of transmission in a congregate setting like a workplace was extremely high. And so we just didn't want to be a part of that. And at the same time, I think keeping our people safe is important, but we also had to keep making medicine, because every day 40 million people take a pill or a shot from Lilly for another disease, not COVID. And we couldn't just let that run out. So to protect our manufacturing employees, we didn't want them commingling with non-essential people for that mission. And so we wanted to reduce their risk as much as we could. So it seemed like an obvious thing for us. Of course, I remember the following week, I had tickets, good tickets, courtside tickets to the Big Ten basketball tournament at Bankers Life Fieldhouse. I'm a big Boilermaker fan, and they were playing on that Thursday. I think they played the IU game that night on Wednesday.
That was the last game played at Wednesday.
Yeah, but the next morning they canceled the tournament. I was personally disappointed I couldn't watch basketball, but it was pretty clear why, and that was a good decision at the time. So I think that's only effectively 4 days after our decision, and maybe a week after we had actually made the call. It tells you how fast the situation moved. I think by that point it seemed obvious to most people that discretionary activities would have to dramatically stop, be reduced.
Dave, 2 other critical things in that same time frame, as far as the testing capabilities that Lilly was able to do to supplement what the state had just begun, and then the drive-through testing. Again, talk about how those came together once again quickly, how the company was able to move on those.
Yeah. Well, those came together. The testing came together, and the drive-through idea pretty close to each other at the end of February, early March. This happened because actually one of the first index cases in the state is someone that was known to the company and had socially interacted with a number of management at the company. And so we had gone through the drill of understanding that person's testing experience, having a bunch of people who are company management get tested in the state, and then do the contact tracing around that. This is before we closed our office. it was just random that occurred for us. I think, so this is even before the 9th, first week in March, that experience of trying to track down who might have been exposed and are they sick, was not working well. And I had a conversation with our head of R&D at the time. We both observed that. And he asked me a direct question, which is, hey, we have a laboratory here we use to support our clinical trials. It's like an in-house lab to do our own, kind of fancy tests for drugs that aren't approved yet, and do more elaborate testing in a clinical trial setting. Could we convert that laboratory, which is so-called CLIA approved, so it's a clinical laboratory licensed by FDA and the state, to a dedicated COVID-19 testing lab, and make this process work a lot better, at least here in central Indiana? So I said, yes, let's do it. And the team there, who are trained lab professionals, and they do this for a living, but inside of clinical trials, converted itself to making COVID-19 tests. Interestingly, along the way, they found out that many of the ingredients that you need to run this test were not available. And so, because we do science at Lilly, we actually commissioned our chemistry group to make them. So we started making our own ingredients. And then, because we did it ourselves, we actually had to get an FDA approval for our test as a unique test, which we submitted and got approved by the 3rd week in March. So that happened in 2 weeks.
So another example of the speed and action that was taking place.
Yeah, and the FDA approving that and figuring things out, going backwards from first principles. So we made our own reagents. We started running our own tests. The state was running at about 50 tests a day up until that point. And we turned on our capacity. And within a few weeks, we got up to what was our peak capacity, which was 2,500. So a 50-fold increase in state capacity. We started by just taking the state lab samples into Lilly and testing them and giving the results back to the state. But it became clear that there were other bottlenecks in terms of getting people tested, especially, walking into a doctor's office or a hospital if you think you have COVID seemed like a bad idea, both to healthcare professionals and the patients. So this drive-through model, we had seen on TV in South Korea. And right there in early March as well, we began asking the questions, well, could we set such a thing up ourselves? And so we did. We went to work on that. We've never administered healthcare as a drug company. It's not really what we do. So we had to figure out how to do that with HIPAA compliant privacy and using healthcare professionals who are currently licensed, who work at the company. But we had hundreds of Lilly employees who are licensed and could participate as nurses, pharmacists, or doctors, sign up, volunteer to work day and night on the system. And we got up to 800 or 900 tests a day through the drive-through, and then also used our capacity to backstop the state until that was no longer necessary, and the gaps got filled in by June. Quite a remarkable story. We still run our testing, by the way, for our clinical trials in COVID, and also for all our employees and their families. So if you're a Lilly employee and you think you might be sick, you can get tested pretty quickly down at the company.
Well, Dave, let's take a 15-minute COVID break here. Let's
talk
about
great. Yeah.
That's got to be good for everybody every once in a while. Again, you were born in California. You told me you went to school outside New York, but you came to Indiana twice for reasons that eventually both times revolved around family a bit. Explain a little bit to our listeners what brought you here to Indiana.
Well, actually, and if I said I was born in California, I probably would have meant I grew up there in grade school in early years. I was actually born in Bloomington, Indiana.
Okay.
My dad was a grad student at IU. My mother had a young child at home, but was working at IU in the residence system. And I only lived there for a few months in a small house south of campus there. But that was my birthplace, Bloomington Hospital. So we moved, and I grew up in California, then high school in New York, as you said. I ended up coming to Purdue for university, in part because the family connection to Lafayette. My dad grew up in Lafayette. My grandparents lived there, and we visited many times. and both my parents attended Purdue as well as other relatives. So there's a family connection there. But also, I just wanted to get off the coast and do something different. I was interested in studying engineering, and what better place to go? So tremendous experience, and ever grateful for the education and the life experience Purdue gave me to get started. I then worked in New York City for IBM. I took a job with them first as a systems engineer, and then as an account executive selling computers to banks. IBM was going through a lot of change at the time, and because my now wife, then girlfriend, had decided to go to med school at IU Med School, I entertained the idea of going to IU as well to get in the same time zone and to get an MBA. So that's what I did. We ended up getting married during that period of time, and then I took a job at Lilly following that MBA. And there were lots of opportunities at the time for me. I was interested in healthcare, but mostly we settled in Indianapolis because she was still in med school. And so I always laugh when I say this, but it is mostly true, as I joined Lilly for love.
Yeah, that's right. Great how circumstances work out.
Yeah.
We talked, and people can read in BizVoice about a lot of your experiences during your 20 plus years at Lilly before becoming CEO. But I want to ask you a little bit of a different question here. After all those experiences, after you're elevated to this top leadership role, what did you say to yourself that in preparation, here's what I want to accomplish in this role?
Yeah. Well, I thought a lot about that. As I was offered the job, there was a 2-week period between that and the announcement. And that was an exciting and a nervous time for me. Obviously, the importance of this company to the state, in our industry, long history, and huge shoes I had to fill behind John Lechleiter and other giants who have led the company, was truly humbling. That said, I had a lot of firsthand knowledge of how the place worked and what we were capable of. And so I tried to push those things together and literally wrote out kind of a when I leave list. And I haven't shared that list, and I won't do that because you might ask me that next. But there were definitely things that I thought we could improve quickly, and we're going to get my focus immediately. And then things over the long haul, some things about culture, we tend to be really committed and purpose-driven company, but sometimes a little insular to the outside world, perhaps based on our location or the lack of a major competitor in town or whatever. So those are things, I made a list of, and I'm working my way through it.
Well, I won't ask you what's on the list, but I will ask you, do you go back and visit the list and
every year? Yeah.
Update it at all, or just to get a status of where things are?
Yeah, of course. I've added to it. I've taken a couple things off it that no longer seemed as relevant, but mostly it's still there. I have an annual ritual I've done for a long time, but I look at this annually. We shut down the company between Christmas and New Year's, and it's one of these magical periods where nobody sends you an email. And you can really take a period to reflect. It's also the end of the year, so it's a good time to think about what you did well, what you could improve on, and what needs to happen in the coming period. And I have every year pulled up that list and reflected on which of these items need to get pushed into this year, which of these should be deferred, and where should I begin to lay the groundwork. Making progress.
You referenced in that Dave talking, and I'm sure on that list is we'll call it community engagement and being heavily involved in the community, and that's not always been the case, not only for Eli Lilly and Company but others. It's been a bit of an evolution. Talk about why that's so crucial today, and personally how you kind of view that role for you in the company and helping impact community change.
It's a great question. And Lilly, and this started with the family, right? I think has always stepped into a leading role in the community as a company and as the founding family, which ran the company for nearly 100 years, 3 generations. They were always there, and I think we could all shudder to think what the state or the city would be like if it weren't for that family. Still today, their legacy lives through the endowment, separate organization from ours, but our largest shareholder. So, I think we're all at Lilly deeply aware of that tradition and that feeling that there's something beyond just running a good business. We do. Not to sell short running a good business. I think a lot of good things can be achieved with that. Create wealth for our shareholders who are usually retirees and pensioners. Create good jobs and opportunity that provides family, good quality of life, et cetera. So those are good things. But we also make medicines. That's an important contribution. And then playing a leadership role in the community can also be obviously very important. Somebody has to step forward to create the start of a moment turning into a movement. And I think at times Lilly as a company and the leaders of the company have done that. You can go all the way back to our Civil War monument downtown, which was because the colonel himself wanted to host a re-encampment for Civil War veterans 20 years after the war. Or his son, J.K., who was part of the Community Chest founding in Indianapolis, now our United Way. Or, of course, J.K. Jr. and Mr. Eli, who created really the modern endowment that leads so many things in our community. So we're all aware of that. But I have to say, my thought, and I think probably the expectations of corporate CEOs, public company CEOs, have shifted even in my 4 years in the job. That increasingly people in society, I think, look to corporate actors to do the right thing, not just make good products, to be a model for other companies and to participate in public discourse in a way that probably my predecessors would have been pretty uncomfortable with. I get uncomfortable with sometimes. So we think carefully about, well, should we be involved? What is our role? My evolution has included pretty broad embrace of our local community issues, though, because of the scale of the company, still the largest private employer in the state, and the impact when we do get involved to convene others. And some of the race equity work or some of the COVID activities have been examples of that, Tom.
Dave, the downtown Indianapolis and certainly other communities around the state are hurting as we close out 2020 here. What have you seen in regard to what it'll take to revive the economic activity? And are there some lessons to be learned from 2020 that can help move things forward in a positive way?
It's a good question. I suspect this is not the best moment to sort of do the Monday morning quarterback on how could we have managed this better or what could we do to restart faster. But of course, I have opinions about it. My overriding opinion, which is not popular with everybody I know, is that fundamentally we don't have an economic problem. We had a great active downtown in February. We have a economy that could be more diversified. Downtown Indianapolis relies heavily on convention tourism and sports tourism, and that could be diversified. The state's economy is heavily manufacturing based, light manufacturing, and that could be diversified. I think that those concentrations create vulnerabilities. That's a long-term opportunity for us, and one that policymakers have been focused on. But probably the thing that we could be a stronger leader on now, and I think recognizing the way out as well as the way back is really all about controlling the healthcare crisis, because this is a economic downturn driven by a public health problem. It's not an economic downturn driven by lack of competitiveness or liquidity problems or other things. We need to eradicate this virus. That's what we need to do. And when we do, people will feel safe and economic activity will return. Until we do, it won't return. There's no of course, we should do things to help people sustain a livelihood and keep use public resources to ensure that we have an infrastructure when we come back. But to try to fill restaurants or whatever now makes no sense to me. I think what we should do is try to crush the virus.
And by doing that, is it fair to say we'll be better prepared for whatever comes next, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Well, there will be many lessons learned in doing it. I mean, this will take, I think, three things. One, much stronger adherence to public health measures that are, let's be honest, annoying and we're tired of, but are required to stop the spread. Masking, social distancing, lack of human congregation indoors in particular. We need more of that, maybe a lot more of that than we have right now. Secondly, we need to make sure the healthcare system is strong and viable so it can absorb the people who get sick and the worst doesn't happen and our fatality rates don't spike again. I think they're doing pretty well. There's probably some improvements there on testing turnaround times, on making sure that capacities are in the right place, especially in small towns in Indiana, where we can see local surges that are happening right now, and the healthcare system gets overwhelmed quickly. That causes very bad outcomes for everybody. And then finally, my vision for the state should be we should try to make Indiana the most vaccinated state in the country as quickly as possible. And we could stand to have a very strong public health campaign around that, as well as considering mandatory vaccination for significant chunks of the population. I know that can be unpopular in this libertarian air, but
being a leader in vaccinations is a good thing. So
I would think, right? And that's how you crush the virus. And I think the most vaccinated state will have the fastest GDP recovery on the back end of the pandemic.
All right, 2 final questions as we get ready to wrap up. We'll go lighter again. Usually I ask people what they like to do in their spare time, but since I know at least one part of that answer, I'm going to rephrase the question. What is your favorite mountain range and why?
You do know a little bit about me. I love going to the mountains. It's relaxing. I like the physical part, and it's, of course, beautiful. I'm going to have to go with the Teton Mountains in Wyoming. We have a small place out there where I get to look at them, and occasionally I get time to go walk through them, and often like to ski down them. So that'd be my favorite range.
All right. And as we wrap up, then we ask everybody this season of the In Chamber, thinking about it from a professional, a personal standpoint, however you'd like to approach it. At the end of the day, what has made it a great day for Dave Ricks?
Well, I think when I get a chance to make a difference for the company, which makes a difference for patients, I feel good professionally. I also think it's important that the social relationships, which perhaps this year we're missing, you can invest in and draw upon those. That makes it a good day too. This year's been full of the first, but maybe a little less of the second than I would have liked. Looking forward to a better set of days in 2021 where we can make a difference and engage with our colleagues, have some fun, and draw energy from each other.
Well, Dave, congratulations to you and of course, the entire team at Eli Lilly and Company, and for your recognition as the 2020 Ogletree Deakins Business Leader of the Year. And thank you for sharing this time with our listeners.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
We appreciate it so much. As mentioned, this is the first in our series of conversations. We'll be bringing you the Government Leader of the Year, Dr. Christina Box, on November 16th. Our dynamic leader, Brad Bostic of HC1, on November 20th. And Fort Wayne Mayor Tom Henry will join us on November 24th as representing the Community of the Year. Thank you, as always, for listening to the In Chamber. We'll be back soon with our next conversation.